Hello and welcome to the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Gini Dietrich.
There's always sort of a pause after I say I'm Chip Griffin. I'm wondering what it is that do you think that I'm going to overrun and you're just wait? Because I know I've done that before in recordings, but every time I listen back to the recordings and I'm getting ready to publish them, there's that slight pause after I say my name.
It's because, Chip, I have to filter myself to be professional. And I have to remember we're recording. So I think filter, 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 and then I speak.
I think that ship has sailed, Ginny. Anyone who has listened to this show and is expecting the two of us to be professional all throughout, you probably haven't ever heard one of these shows before.
Fair. But, I do begin the recording by trying to be professional.
That is good. You do try.
That's why. Filter, filter, filter. All
right. Well, and I took us right off the rails, right off the bat, before we even could say anything about what we're going to talk about. And it's tough because, I want to try to do a better job of planning the show. I don't want to just, wing it and take it day by day.
We don't wing it. We had 3 topics in a row that you planned.
We did.
And emailed to me. 3 in a row. We don't have anything for next week, but, we have time.
Oh, I mean, that's a whole 7 days away.
I know.
That's what a
week
week
fine.
is. Yeah.
We don't wing it.
But what you did was you just stomped all over my segue because I was trying to lead into our topic today, which is long-term planning. So instead of running with my segue...
Sorry. See, yes. I lasted all of 3 minutes.
Indeed. But yes, so if you've been listening to the show, you know that we've been generally saying you need to focus on survival, try to make short-term plans. This was what we said starting back in March. You need to kind of get through and figure it out. But I think both of us have now shifted to advising folks that it's time to start taking a longer-term view because we know none of this is going to go away anytime soon. There are a lot of impacts that will stick around. And so now is really the time, if you haven't already, to start thinking about how you want to look ahead to the next 12, 18, 24 months, or perhaps even beyond that. So you at least have some direction that you're rowing in with your team and you're not just focused on the next few weeks.
Yeah, and I would say right now, as we're recording this, that's very challenging to do because in many parts of the country, the schools have not yet decided what they're going to do. Chicago Public Schools here yesterday just said that they're not going back in person. Independent and private schools have not made that announcement yet, so we're still trying to figure things out. But I also, at the same time, read an article in The Atlantic, which I'll send you the link so that we can include it in the show notes. I think it was The Atlantic. But that talked about how things change or if they change when there's a vaccine. And there were 2 things that stuck out to me. One is that people will still continue to wear masks, especially if they are higher risk. So, where other countries do that because of pollution and things like that, we're going to see that because of infectious diseases here, which is an interesting shift, I think. And the second is that they're rushing so fast to get a vaccine that they're not sure what those longer term implications are going to be. And so there's all this stuff. And of course, the economy and, we have clients that work in manufacturing and they're seeing a big boom right now because they're having to catch up from having not worked for, several weeks. But they also anticipate that that's going to start to slide off too, depending on what happens in other countries, what happens in Asia, what happens in what's going on in the UK right now. So there's a lot of global things that are happening that can affect what we do and how we plan. At the same time, something that we can control, and that's how we grow our agencies, and that's what we should be focused on.
Yeah, and I think that there are tremendous numbers of unknowns still. As you think about the vaccine, you have to think about, are we going to get one? When are we going to get one? What's going to be the uptake of that vaccine? Are people really going to be willing to take that shot in the arm? And I think that there's been
literally.
Well, yeah, I mean exactly, and there's been so much controversy around everything related to this. It's been turned into a completely political thing. In fact, speaking of schools, I saw a Gallup survey earlier this week that showed that I think it was 85% of parents who identify as Democrats are concerned about their kids catching COVID. Only 25% of Republican parents have the same concern.
What?
It is a phenomenal. I've never seen anything like this where something from the political realm moves into the medical that deeply, because that's huge. And we already had sort of the anti-vax groups that were against vaccines generally. You've got this whole thread of conspiracy theorists out there who think that the pandemic is really just a conspiracy to get you to take the vaccine, which is going to do all sorts of other wacky stuff to you. So even once we get there, under the best of circumstances, I think most people would say it would take many months, even after the vaccine's available, before it's enough people are properly inoculated. But if you have a delay in people accepting the vaccine, then that becomes even longer. So either way, bottom line is, and we're not health experts, this isn't a political show, but at the end of the day, you have to do your planning based on what's going to happen in the environment around you. And the reality is that where we are today is likely where we're going to be for quite some time. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty. There's going to be a lot of disruption, and you need to plan around that and not hope that it comes to an end.
Well, and I keep reading. I've told you this story before, where I sit at, I get everything done for the day, shut down my computer, get kids bathed and fed and all that kind of stuff, and then I sit down with my phone. And I swipe right and I look at the top stories, and then I'm like, okay, I should read that article. And then I click over and I start to read, and I'm like, and get mad, and I throw my phone. But I have been reading a lot about the economy and what this looks like, especially with the supply chain interruptions, and that it could very well really blow up in the next 2 months by the 1st of October. And so when you think about it from that perspective, you have to really, and I actually wrote about this today, you have to think about how can we stuff our pipeline full and get paid in advance, because this stuff could, I'm anticipating that it's going to be worse than the Great Recession from a business perspective.
I think it's likely, and I think that it will be different, as all recessions are. There's differences in who gets hit, how hard they get hit, and as we always say, there are also opportunities in it. But what you've said about supply chain and some of those things, I mean, we continue to see difficulty in getting basic things, right? I mean, one of the things that I've been doing the last couple of days is trying to get a new laptop, because I managed to offload my old MacBook Air, not that old, it's less than a year old, off on my son, who's headed to college because he needed something beyond the Chromebook that he had been using, and I was happy to get out of Apple land. So, but now trying to find a laptop that's in stock anywhere is really difficult. I mean, there are laptops available. They're just not the ones that you want to have. And part of this is because, there's been some new releases where there's some particularly good stuff available, and I'm not going to bore folks who don't care about the technical details like I do. So a lot of those aren't available, but even basic laptops are very hard to come by. They're very slow to get delivered. So, I've seen that in other areas too. It's generally been improving. I mean, as I've been building my studio here, getting some of the little bits and pieces that I need is easier today generally than it was in March, but some things still have a very long lead time, and that does have a trickle-down effect on other industries, not just the ones who are using them. So agencies in particular will end up getting hit by these, and so you need to really know the industries you serve and how they're being impacted, and really talk to them to figure out how they're likely to be impacted. What are they seeing in their own businesses, in their own industry?
Yeah, and like I said, we do a lot of work in manufacturing, and they've seen a big boom right now. But one of the challenges that they're also facing is, and this may change with whether or not unemployment benefits continue, but they're seeing that they can't fill the jobs. So they had to furlough, and they didn't have any business because everything came to a halt. And now everybody's needing to double up because they have to make up for the weeks that they were off. But they can't find the labor. They can't find the help because people are getting these unemployment benefits, and which is great. I mean, I think it's certainly, like you said, this is not a political show. I think it's great that people have that, but they also can't find people to do the jobs, so that's affecting it too. So yeah, really having, I like to have those business kind of conversations with our clients just to see Like what's happening and how's it affecting, and can you pay me in advance because the money might not be here in 2 months.
Right, right. Well, I think this is also a time, particularly as agencies and agency owners in particular are looking towards the future and trying to do their own planning. You need to think about how your own outlook has changed. What what is it that you want to accomplish? And I think this is something, Ginny, that you've written about recently. Whoops, let's see if I can put up the right screen there.
Now we're on the trading floor now.
Everybody would like to see the control room. You can see you have the behind the scenes look here. But so a lot of agency owners have gone through this and said, well, what I thought I wanted 6 or 12 months ago is not what I still want personally. And so if your outlook on things have changed, and I do encourage folks, don't make rash decisions right now. We are still in that very much stressed period. And so, you don't want to make giant irreversible decisions if you can avoid it. But you do want to think about how has it changed and make sure that you're putting the business to work for you. And so if you want something different, figure out how to bring your agency along to help you get there. And this means looking at as Wayne Gretzky used to say, where the puck is going, not where it is.
Yep.
And so you need to be thinking that same way about your business. You're not going to be able to make overnight change. You're not going to be able to fix things overnight. You're not going to be able to change things overnight. But if you have no idea where you're trying to go, you're unlikely to make the right decisions today that will help you get there in a reasonable time frame.
And you have no idea what's going to happen at the end of this year. They keep talking about a second wave is coming. We don't know if we're going to be shut down again. I'm seeing, we have a client in the UK, and there's a lot of conversation there about doing a 6 to 8 week shutdown again in September and October, which means we'll follow suit, I would imagine. So we don't know.
I actually don't think we will.
You don't think so?
No, I don't. I do not think that the U.S. will do another total shutdown like we had in March. I think anything will be more focused than it was before. I have a very difficult time seeing anyone being able to pull off a complete shutdown.
We'll see. But the point is that you really need to be prospecting now. And, we've talked about how uncomfortable it can be to prospect right now. And, people are still doing business and there are RFPs still going out. And I'm not a believer in RFPs, but that does show that there is business to be had. So prospect, talk to, former clients, talk to clients who have put you on pause, see if there's an opportunity to restart, maybe at a lower rate. Like get yourself back into the game and get that pipeline full, because you're going to need it by fourth quarter.
Yeah, and business is definitely picking up for agencies. I mean, just about every agency that I'm talking to now is seeing an increase in their pipeline, if not an actual increase in their revenue. Now, some of those are starting from a very bad place in some cases, but either way, there is a lot more business taking place over the last month or so than what I had seen previously, and so it's there. It's often different than the kind of work that was being done before, the kinds of wins that agencies were having. It is more short-term and results-focused and less, sort of the big picture type stuff. But that's fine. That there's a lot of money to be had there. And so you just need to figure out how to tailor your offer to what your target market needs today. And if you can deliver that, people are going to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I keep saying this, but they will pay in advance. So, I have lots of clients who say, well, I'm not comfortable asking for money up front. And I'm like, the best time to negotiate that is when you're negotiating the contract. Just put it as part of the contract. Right. And I've never had a client say no. The only time I've ever had somebody say no is we were working with a Fortune 5 company, and they just said, we can't because of our procurement office. So we created an opportunity where we submitted the invoices in May and we were paid in July. So we didn't even start the work until July. There was stuff that we did that they could put on a credit card because it was below the minimum. And so we did some of that stuff, but the actual work, we submitted the invoices in May and we got paid in July, and that's when we started. So we still made do with being able to do that. So ask for money up front. That's one of the most important things I think you can do, because as we all know, cash is king.
Yeah, and if you're doing a project where you're getting paid in chunks, Back when I used to do a lot of web development work for clients,
Yep.
we typically would break it up into 2 or 3 payments. Make sure that in addition to milestones, you're also putting in date triggers. Because those are the
That's
kinds
smart.
of things that can slide, particularly now, because businesses are changing their own strategies, and so that may slow down some of the work that you're doing. And so you want to make sure that you're not getting paid simply when they accept a thing, or if if they have to give you some feedback on to get to the next step or whatever. Make sure that you're saying upon completion of this milestone or this certain
This
date.
date. That's smart. Yeah.
Whichever comes first, because you really want to make sure that you're protecting yourself. Because I'm talking with a couple of agencies right now that are having challenges because of that, because they are simply milestone based payments, and for a variety of reasons, those businesses have not been able to move the ball forward as quickly as they needed to help the agency get the job done.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and especially with that kind of work, because we all know websites don't launch on time because of the content, not because of the web design and development.
I know that that's a topic that you really like to talk about, but we won't go further on that one because
No,
this is a family show. So, I think the other thing that folks need to think about when they're doing strategic planning right now is that you need to create the conditions for success. You need to work to influence the things that you can do right now. You don't have the level of control that you may have had before or felt you had before. That's okay. You need to let go of the notion that you're going to be able to have those really fixed milestones in your own planning, because it is going to change based on what the environment is like, whether you can go back to the office, whether your clients can go back to the office, what the supply chain is, what the economy is, what the politics is. Because while we don't want to talk about politics, we do have an election coming up in the U.S. That's likely to cause a lot of activity, shall we say.
Yes.
And that is going to spill over into the business community, whether we want it to or not. And regardless of the outcome, it's going to have an impact. And so you need to be thinking about that in terms of, what are the different options that might happen politically, and how am I going to be affected, and how are my industries going to be affected by that? Because that's critical to your strategic planning over the next year or two.
And I would say school too, because even if kids are going back in person full time, which it sounds like many will not do that, but even if they do, what happens if somebody tests positive and they have to shut everything down for 2 weeks while they disinfect? And like all of that kind of stuff is disruptive to the work that we're doing and to our ability to grow our agencies and for people to focus. Like you and I got on to this recording the first thing, and you said, "How are you, Jenny?" And I just put my head on my desk like, this is a lot. And some days are great and some days are a little more needy.
Yeah, well, and that's okay, but that should be part of your planning too. You need to make sure that
Absolutely.
you and
It
your
needs to be.
team are taking time to recharge and re-energize yourselves, because this is a marathon, not a sprint. It is something where we do need to be thinking about how do we continue on. And because it's very difficult to do the kinds of vacations that most of us are used to or want to have, a lot of us just aren't taking time off. And I've always been terrible about that, so I'm not a good example. But I know there are a lot of people, employees, owners, all that, who are not taking time because they're like, well, what's the point? I can't do anything, so I might as well work.
Yeah. Right.
And that worked when this looked like it was going to be potentially a shorter term thing where we'd get back to quote unquote normal within a few months. It is now clear that is not going to happen. And so you need to be thinking about, if I'm looking at this as a long-term play, how does that impact, the health and welfare of myself and my team? And how do I make sure that I'm encouraging my team to take time off? How do I make sure that just because we're working at home, we're not just interrupting each other 24/7 because, well, I know exactly where they are right now. They didn't go anywhere. Right? So, but that needs to be part of your planning process. And particularly if you were not a virtual agency to begin with, if you had an office, I'm seeing a lot of those agencies having a difficult time making the adjustment to the longer term, because as I think we've talked about before, people made a lot of exceptions and were very forgiving in the early stages, but now you have to find that new way of working. And so, that's going to require some adaptations. And the reality is, I don't think people are going to be back in their offices on a regular basis in most places for a long time.
A long time, if ever.
Yeah, I mean, what Google announced, I think June of next year is the earliest that they will be having employees back.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a year from now, folks.
Yeah.
If Google has done that, I would expect to see the other big tech companies do that. That will then spill over into other spaces as well. So you need to be thinking about that. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for your clients? Events. I mean, if you are dependent upon events, if your clients are dependent upon events, you need to rethink that strategy entirely. Because while I know there are some events that are still technically on the calendar for later this year, they ain't going to happen.
Not happening.
Not happening.
They're not.
Not gonna happen. As George H.W. Bush would have said.
Bush.
Yeah. Not gonna happen. Actually, Dana Carvey would have said that on. But anyway.
Right.
I digress. So you need to think about, okay, well, so if that's how I've typically gotten my clients by going to industry events, or if I've generally helped clients who are events focused for getting their own business, how do I rethink that? And this is an opportunity to think really creatively about how you might do that. And nobody has really nailed the virtual event thing. There are all sorts of different ideas. I just saw Microsoft Teams has come out with a new thing where they make it look like everybody's camera is an audience member. I assume they must green screen out the background and put them in front of graphics of seats so that if you're looking at it, you can actually see sort of an auditorium of real faces.
Interesting.
I haven't tried it. I don't know if it's laughable or if it's interesting or what, or how feasible it is technologically. It may require too much firepower for a lot of folks. Who knows? There are a lot of people trying a lot of different things, and so you need to be exploring and learning and figuring out how you can, come up with something new and fresh or take advantage of something that someone else has already done.
Yeah, and I would also look at. I mean, Google's a great example of that because when some subsequent articles after they made that announcement talked about how now people can move from the Silicon Valley, which is extraordinarily expensive and most people can't afford to live there. Now they're looking at, now that I don't have an office to go to and I don't have to commute, can I move to Montana or Wyoming or, wherever it happens to be and not, and still be able to do my job. And I think you're going to see a lot of that mass exodus from the big centers where people were going into office buildings because they're not doing that anymore. And how does that affect your team?
Yeah, and not even just big centers. I mean, I've been talking with an agency owner who is looking to make a geographic move. It's from one small to mid market to another small to mid market. It's not getting out of a city. It's just that she and her family feel like that's where they want to live. Cool,
yeah,
right?
interesting.
I mean, and so I think
you can be anywhere.
Yeah, a lot of people are realizing that in this new world there is a lot more mobility possible. And so you may be thinking about it yourself as an owner, but certainly your employees may be thinking about that. You need to think about how that fits in. And the other piece strategically, I mean, we always talk about agencies being a collection of talent. You need to think about what your talent needs to look like in 6, 12, 18, 24 months. We've all been focused the last few months on preserving jobs and doing everything we can to kind of be fair to everybody and all that, and we still want to be fair and all that, but we also need to be thinking about what should our teams look like a year from now. What do we need if we've seen a big change in our business model, if we've seen a big change in physically where we're operating, what changes do we want to make to that team? Because again, thinking about where that puck is going to be, you can start to make those plans now. Doesn't mean you have to make actual changes yet, but if you know, this is, I need this role or I don't need this role, you can start mapping it out and figuring out how to get from here to there while treating your employees fairly and while also doing what's right for the business.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot to consider. The external incidences we've always had to consider, but I think there's a lot more now. And we're certainly still in the middle of a massive, stressful situation. Like I said, some days are better than others. And we all joke about what day is it? I have no idea what day it is. The homeless guy down the street the other day said, "Happy Wednesday." And I was like, is it? I don't know if it is. So there's a lot going on.
I just know that I always look forward to Thursday because it's when I get to talk to you, Ginny. So that's
Oh, right.
that is the
Yes,
highlight of
thanks.
my week. Well, since apparently nausea is now setting in, we will draw this episode to a close. And it does seem like the small native is also anxious.
The
anxious for a
intern
little
is,
attention. So,
yeah.
and unless you would like to be a guest host, it's probably best that we draw this one to a close. So,
Yes.
with that, I'm Chip Griffin,
And I'm Ginny Dietrich.
and it depends.